The day began with the kind of perfection little girls dream about when they imagine their wedding day. The morning sun spilled its golden warmth through the curtains of my room. The air filled with the fragrance of fresh lilies my mother had ordered because she knew they were my favorite. Laughter and chatter of my bridesmaids filled the space as they rushed around fixing my gown, curling my hair, pinning the veil in place, telling me again and again how radiant I looked, how lucky I was to be marrying the man I loved, the man I had trusted for years. And in those moments I let myself believe it all. I let myself sink into the fantasy that love conquers everything, that this day was the reward for every sacrifice, every compromise, every sleepless night spent dreaming of a future together. My heart beat faster as I imagined walking down the aisle, my father's proud arm holding me steady, my groom waiting at the altar with eyes filled with devotion, our vows echoing in the grand hall where chandeliers sparkled like captured stars. But fate has a cruel way of tearing illusions apart when you least expect it, and as I stood at the threshold of the aisle, bouquet clutched in trembling hands, I began to sense something strange. Whispers rippling like a poisonous wave among the guests, shifting glances, uneasy expressions, as though a storm had entered the hall before I even took a step. Confusion clouded my heart until my best friend rushed towards me, her face pale, her phone trembling in her hands, her voice breaking as she said, "You need to see this before you go inside." And with a sinking feeling, I looked at the screen. The world stopped spinning. My knees nearly gave out, because staring back at me was the man I was about to marry, wrapped around another woman, kissing her as if I had never existed. The time stamp mocked me. It was from the night before. While I sat nervously writing my vows and rehearsing how I'd promise forever, he had been with her, betraying me in the most unforgivable way. My chest tightened. Tears burned my eyes. The bouquet slipped from my grasp, scattering white petals across the polished floor like fragments of my broken heart. A buzzing sound filled my ears as the whispers grew louder. People had already seen it. The video was spreading like wildfire through the guests. Faces turned towards me, not with joy anymore, but with pity, with shame, with judgment. My mother gasped in horror, clutching her chest. My father's proud stance faltered. And still he came, the man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry, walking down the aisle with a smugness on his face, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't destroyed me. His eyes met mine, and instead of guilt I saw arrogance. He leaned closer, his voice a poisonous whisper. "What? It doesn't matter. You're still here, aren't you? You still want me?" And something inside me snapped. The love I had clung to for so long shattered under the weight of his betrayal. I wiped my tears with trembling hands, my chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, and then from somewhere deep inside me, strength I never knew I had surfaced. A fire burned away the weakness. I turned towards the crowd, my voice breaking, yet strong enough to echo through the hall. There will be no wedding today. Not with a man who knows nothing of loyalty, not with someone who betrayed me before we even began. Choose myself. I choose dignity. Silence followed, the kind of silence that drowns the world. Only gasps and murmurs filling it as my words hung in the air. His face turned pale, then twisted with rage. He grabbed at my arm, but I pulled away with a force that shocked even me. I walked out of that glittering hall, out of the gasps and whispers, out of the pitying stares and judgmental glances. The heavy fabric of my gown dragging behind me, lace catching on the steps, my tears blinding me as I stumbled into the cold night, the air biting against my flushed cheeks, and I collapsed onto the stone steps outside, the sound of laughter and music from the hall still echoing faintly behind me. Now like mockery, my heart felt like it had been torn out of my chest. Memories of his promises, of nights spent dreaming about our future, of the way he used to hold my hand and tell me I was his forever. All of it stabbed me like cruel reminders of how foolishly I had trusted him. I hugged myself, rocking slightly, wondering why love was so cruel, wondering why fate had given me a fairy tale only to snatch it away in the most humiliating way possible. The street was nearly empty, the world indifferent to the storm raging inside me, till suddenly headlights cut through the darkness, blinding me momentarily as a sleek black car slowed in front of me, the kind of car that radiated power and wealth, the kind of car I had only ever seen in glossy magazines. The engine went silent, and for a moment I panicked, not knowing who it could be, until the door opened and he stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered. The kind of man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him, his suit tailored perfectly, his steps steady and assured. But what struck me most wasn't his wealth, or his aura of power. It was the way his eyes softened the moment they fell on me. Not with pity, but with a strange kind of understanding. As if he had seen pain before, as if he recognized the shards of my broken heart. Without a word, he removed his coat, a rich dark fabric that carried the warmth of him, and draped it gently over my trembling shoulders. The simple act felt like a lifeline, a shield against the cold, not just of the night, but of betrayal itself. I looked up at him, words trapped in my throat, tears still streaming down my face, and then he spoke, his voice deep, steady, carrying a power that silenced the chaos in my chest. No man who cannot see your worth deserves you. Don't waste your tears on someone too blind to treasure a diamond. His words sank into me, shaking me to the core. Because for the first time that night I felt seen, not as a pitiful abandoned bride, but as someone who still held value, someone who still had strength. His gaze didn't carry pity. It carried respect, and though he was a stranger, I felt safer in his presence than I had ever felt with the man I almost married. My lips trembled. I tried to thank him, but no sound came. I could only stare at him, this stranger whose timing felt too perfect to be mere coincidence. Fate had dragged me into despair only to place this man in front of me at the exact moment I thought I had lost everything. And though I didn't yet know who he was, though I had no idea that he was a man whose name carried power in the world of business, a CEO whose empire was known across the city, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. That night, under the cold sky, with betrayal still tearing at my heart, fate had just introduced me to the man who would change everything. The night after my ruined wedding felt like a storm. I could never escape the whispers, the pity. The betrayal kept replaying in my head over and over, and I thought I would never breathe freely again, but the image of the man who had stepped out of that black car lingered in my mind, his eyes, his words, his unexpected kindness, like a faint light in a room full of shadows. I had not asked for him. I had not expected him yet. There he was, as though fate itself had carved a path for him to cross. Mine, and when he draped his coat over my shoulders, it was not just warmth, it was dignity, it was safety something. I thought I had lost forever. I remember how he stood there silently giving me space to cry and break without trying to silence me, without trying to tell me it was okay, when clearly it was not. And when finally I found the strength to look up, he only said gently, "Let me take you home. You should not be here alone." My pride told me to refuse, but my heart that was shattered into 1,000 pieces longed for any place that was not those cold stone steps outside the hall. So I nodded and let him lead me to his car. I sat there still in my gown, my veil half torn, my makeup ruined, and yet he did not stare at me like others. Had he did not see shame, he only saw a woman who had been wronged undeservedly. The silence between us was heavy yet not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that understood without words. I wanted to ask his name, but my lips trembled, so I remained quiet, and he respected that, driving through the city lights until finally he stopped in front of my parents' house. He looked at me one last time before I left and said, "You are stronger than you think. You will rise from this, and when you do, you will shine brighter than ever. Remember that?" And then he was gone like a dream, fading with the dawn, but his words planted themselves deep inside me, and for the first time since my heart had been shattered, I felt a tiny seed of strength begin to grow. The days that followed were not easy. I faced whispers in the streets, pity in the eyes of neighbors, even my relatives, asking what I had done wrong, as if betrayal was my fault. I locked myself in my room some nights, sobbing into my pillow, cursing the man who had humiliated me. But then, remembering the stranger whose eyes had carried no pity, only respect. I did not even know his name yet. His presence haunted me in a way that soothed rather than hurt. And then, as if fate was determined to weave him into my story again, I met him a week later. I had forced myself to return to work, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy, when I entered a corporate event my boss insisted I'd attend, and there he was, standing at the center. of the room, commanding attention without even speaking. The powerful CEO. Everyone whispered about the one who had built an empire with his brilliance and resolve. My heart stopped as I realized the man who had draped his coat over me, the man whose words had saved me from breaking completely, was no ordinary stranger. He was someone the world respected, someone untouchable, and yet he noticed me instantly, as though fate had whispered my arrival into his ear. His eyes met mine, and for a moment the noise of the hall faded. He excused himself from the circle of important men and walked straight to me, his presence towering yet comforting, his voice steady as he said, "I was hoping to see you again. How are you holding up?" And the kindness and those words almost undid me right there in front of everyone. I struggled to keep my composure, but I managed to whisper, "I am surviving." And he smiled faintly, a smile that was not about charm, but about reassurance. And he said, "That is enough for now, one step at a time." And then he asked if I would join him for coffee, not as the CEO everyone admired, but simply as a man offering companionship to a woman who had been broken.
To read.
Not out of obligation, but because my soul longed for the safety I felt around him. And from that day something began to shift slowly. Gently he became a constant presence in my life. Not overwhelming me, not forcing his way in, but appearing exactly when I needed a reminder that I was not weak, that I had worth. That betrayal had not destroyed me. We would meet sometimes after work, and he would listen as I poured out the pain that still lived inside me. He never judged, never rushed me to move on. He only reminded me that healing was a journey, not a race. And I began to notice how different he was from the man I had almost married. The cheater had loved to talk about himself, loved to control, loved to make me feel small. But this man, the CEO, who could have demanded the world, sat quietly and listened as though my words mattered more than boardrooms and millions. His presence rebuilt the parts of me I thought were lost. His belief in me gave me courage to look in the mirror and see not a discarded bride, but a woman who had survived a storm and was learning to rise again. Days turned into weeks, and soon our conversations grew lighter. Laughter found its way back into my life. Moments of peace replaced nights of tears. I found myself looking forward to seeing him more than I admitted. And one evening when he walked me to my door and I thanked him for everything he had done, he looked into my eyes and said, "I did not do this out of pity. I did it because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant for something greater than pain. I do not know what the future holds, but I want to be part of it if you will let me." And my heart trembled because for the first time, I believed that love was not about empty promises. It was about actions. It was about respect. It was about being seen and valued for who you truly are. And as I stood there staring at him under the glow of the porch light, I realized that maybe, just maybe, fate had not been cruel after all. Maybe it had broken me only to lead me to someone who would help me rebuild stronger than ever. Time moved like water slipping through my fingers, yet each day I felt myself growing stronger, not because the pain disappeared, but because, with him beside me, I learned to live beyond it. The CEO who had once been a stranger was now the anchor that steadied me. The laughter he brought back into my life, the respect he showed me, the way he never treated me as fragile, but as someone capable of rising again. All of it wove a tapestry of healing around my broken heart I began to walk with. My head high again, I began to smile without forcing it. I began to believe that maybe fate had not cursed me, but saved me by tearing away what was never meant to be and replacing it with something far greater than I had dared to dream. I remember the first time he took me to his world, not the glittering halls of wealth that everyone saw, but the quiet corners of his soul. He invited me to a dinner, not in a grand ballroom, but in his home, where he cooked simple food and told me stories of his childhood, of how he had built everything from nothing, of how he had known betrayal, to people he trusted had tried to ruin him. And in his voice I heard not arrogance, but resilience, and in his eyes I saw a reflection of my own journey. Two souls broken in different ways, but finding wholeness in each other. One evening, under the glow of city lights, he reached for my hand, his touch firm yet gentle, and he said, "I do not want to rush you, but I want you to know that I am here not just for your pain, but for your joy, for your future, for everything you are." And my heart raced because his words were not the empty promises I had once clung to, they were real, grounded, built on actions I had already seen, and in that moment, I realized I was no longer afraid to love, because love in its true form had found me months past, and the whispers that once mocked me turned into admiration. People saw me walking beside him not as a broken bride, but as a woman cherished and valued, and even those who had pitied me now looked at me with awe. But the past has a way of circling back, and one afternoon as I left a charity event by his side, I saw him, the man who had betrayed me, standing across the street, his eyes wide, his face pale. As though he had seen a ghost, he tried to approach me, calling my name, his voice desperate, but I turned away, not with anger but with indifference, because he no longer had power over me. But he did not stop. He appeared again. Days later, waiting outside my office, begging for a chance to talk, his words tumbling out apologies, regrets, confessions. He said he had made the biggest mistake of his life, that he had lost a diamond while chasing worthless stones, that seeing me now radiant and strong beside a man like the CEO made him realize what he had thrown away. His tears fell, but they meant nothing to me, because once upon a time, I would have given anything to hear those words, but now they were empty, too late, too meaningless. He begged on his knees, telling me he could change, that he still loved me, but love without loyalty is poison, and I would never drink from that cup again. I looked at him with calm eyes and said, "You had your chance, you destroyed it," and I walked past him, feeling the weight of the past lift from my shoulders completely, as if by facing him and rejecting him had sealed the chapter forever. The CEO was waiting for me, not with questions, not with jealousy, but with quiet pride in his eyes, because he knew I had chosen myself first before I chose anyone else, and that was why choosing him now was a choice of strength, not desperation. That night, he took me to a rooftop overlooking the city lights, the wind tangled in my hair, the stars scattered above us, and he held my hands as if they were precious treasures, and he said, "I never believed in destiny until the night I saw you broken on those steps. I thought I was only offering kindness, but you became the missing piece of my life. I do not want to stand beside you only as the man who healed your pain. I want to stand beside you as the man who shares your dreams, your victories, your tomorrows. Will you allow me?" In tears filled my eyes, not of sorrow but of joy, because fate had indeed been cruel. Only to be kind, it had destroyed me. Only to rebuild me, it had broken my heart. Only to give me one far greater than I had imagined. I whispered yes, my voice trembling with happiness, and he pulled me into his arms, the city lights glowing like witnesses to our promise, and in that embrace I knew that I was no longer the girl who was betrayed at the altar. I was the woman who had risen from the ashes to be loved as she deserved to be loved forever. And when word of our union spread, the world saw a lesson in it all, that betrayal does not define us, that pain can be the beginning, not the end, that sometimes fate destroys us only to place us exactly where we were always meant to be. And as for the man who once cheated on me, he was left in the shadows, haunted by the image of what he had lost, watching from a distance as I walked forward, shining brighter than ever beside the CEO, who became not only my prince, but my partner, my equal, my forever, and I never once looked back. Because my story was no longer about the pain of betrayal, but about the triumph of rising above it and embracing the love that fate had written for me all along.